On this week's edition of New York Now, the world is still reeling from the assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump. We unpack the response from state lawmakers, including Governor Kathy Hochul. Next, we learn about the possible legal challenge to the pause on congestion pricing in New York City from a Columbia law professor. And then Assemblymember Pamela Hunter joins us to discuss a bill that would regulate pet insurance policies across the state. I'm Chantel Destra, and this is New York Now.
Today, the Senate majority will pass legislation.
I will fight like hell for you every single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand for New York.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantel Destra. This week, lawmakers in New York and elected officials around the country were reeling with the aftermath of the assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump. While speaking at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania, the former president and this year's Republican presidential nominee was rushed off stage by Secret Service after shots were fired. The former president had been shot at and suffered an injury to the ear. In the midst of the shooting, a rally attendee had been killed and others injured. The gunman was also shot and killed moments later by Secret Service. While speaking to reporters at an unrelated event in the Capital Region this week, Governor Kathy Hochul denounced political violence and said she felt a pit in her stomach of disgust when she heard about what had happened.
To a core, I'm a human being too, and someone harms another, a high-profile individual who I just happen to disagree with on policy, this is still another person who stepped up to offer their vision for the country. I disagree with every element of that, as does President Biden, as do members of my party. But my God, I want to continue to be that beacon of democracy that actually functions and works, and not, descend into those countries where this is the norm. You don't like the leader, you disagree with them, you take them out. You don't recognize elections. You don't even have elections. You eliminate your political opponents. That's not America and will never be that country. That's why we are standing united to condemn this act of violence.
President Joe Biden also gave remarks following the attack, calling for unity amongst both political parties and asked for the political temperature to be cooled.
There's no place in America for this kind of violence, or for any violence ever. Period. No exceptions. We can't allow this violence to be normalized. The political record in this country has gotten very heated. It's time to cool it down. We all have a responsibility to do that. Yes, we have deeply felt strong disagreements. The stakes in this election are enormously high. I've said it many times that the choice in this election we make in this election is going to shape the future of America and the world for decades to come. I believe that with all my soul. I know that millions of my fellow Americans believe it as well. And some have a different view as to the direction our country should take. Disagreement is inevitable in American democracy. It's part of human nature. But politics must never be a literal battlefield, or God forbid, a killing field.
It's important to note that Donald Trump is okay and went on to attend the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee this week, where he recounted the shooting and laid out his vision if elected. As the shooting is still an active investigation by the FBI, the story is still developing. We'll bring you updates on the progress of that investigation, as well as coverage of the upcoming presidential race right here on the show. Now turning to another important topic. As you may recall, a few weeks ago, Governor Kathy Hochul announced a pause on the congestion pricing program that was supposed to be going into effect in New York City this summer. Since that announcement, the governor's decision has faced criticism from supporters of the program who argue it would have greatly helped the city decrease traffic, help the MTA, and assist with the state's climate goals. To learn more about the opposition to the pause, we sat down with Michael Gerrard, professor of law at Columbia University. Here's that conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor Gerrard.
My pleasure to be with you.
Now, we know a few weeks ago, Governor Kathy Hochul announced an indefinite pause on the congestion pricing program in New York City. That was, of course, met with a lot of pushback because the plan was supposed to go into effect this summer. Before we get into some of the possible legal challenges of that pause, I wanted to get your perspective on why the governor has the power and the authority to implement an indefinite pause on the program.
We don't think she does. Uh, a state statute that was passed in 2019 said that the MTA shall implement congestion pricing, notwithstanding any other provision of law. We don't think that the governor has the authority to supersede that state law.
Are there any potential state laws that the governor may have potentially broken by implementing this pause?
Well, we think that she violated the state law that required the MTA to implement congestion pricing. We think that she also violated the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that requires all state agencies to do what they can to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we think she also violated the environmental rights provision of the New York State Constitution, which the voters added in 2022. There may also be some other violations of the laws on disability rights.
In terms of the MT board, we know that they first voted to approve the congestion pricing plan. Of course, that was meant to be implemented this summer. But then after the governor announced the indefinite pause, they then voted to implement that pause. So was there an opportunity for the board to potentially stop the pause from being implemented if they had voted down the governor's decision?
Well, the congestion pricing program requires the approval of the State Department of Transportation. They need to sign a form with the Federal Highway Administration. The State Department of Transportation, acting under the direction of the governor, is refusing to sign the form, and the MTA can't make them do that.
And then in terms of the potential challenges in terms of the state being able to meet its climate goals, what would that look like in court?
Well, one of the purposes of congestion pricing was to reduce air pollution from motor vehicles. But the doing without congestion pricing means there will be more of that air pollution than there would have been otherwise. And that makes it even harder for the state to meet its climate goals.
And is this something that would solely be fought on the state level, or is there an opportunity for this to go as far as federal court?
This would be at the state level. We expect that this will be challenged in state court.
And what would that process look like of it being fought?
Well, it would be a lawsuit filed under a procedure called Article 78, which is supposed to be an expedited process. So I think we're talking about probably a few months, but certainly not years, unless there are appeals that drag on.
And who are the groups that are potentially going to be fighting this? Are these transit rights groups, or are these climate groups, or a mixture of the two?
There are a lot of different groups that are involved and that are interested in participating in the lawsuit. Groups representing riders, groups representing residents of Manhattan and the outer boroughs, groups representing businesses, disability rights, environmental groups. It's remarkable how many groups were appalled by the governor's actions and are very interested in joining the litigation.
And, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the legal positioning of other states, such as New Jersey, that have said that they're hoping that the congestion pricing pause becomes a long-term thing. So if that were to be successful, how would that implement the way that things are figured out in New York State?
There have been a couple of major sets of lawsuits challenging congestion pricing, mostly saying that there wasn't enough environmental review. One of the sets of lawsuits was dismissed 2 weeks ago by the federal district court in New York. The other is still pending before the federal court in New Jersey. If the court in New Jersey rules for the plaintiffs, it doesn't mean that congestion pricing can ever happen, but it means that some more processing is necessary in order for it to happen under the National Environmental Policy Act.
And of course, there were some supporters of the governor's announcement on the pause to the congestion pricing pause. one of them being teachers' unions, who said that the tolls were regressive and discriminatory. Is it too early to say that they are a potential early winner in terms of the governor's pause on the plan?
Well, I guess if they are happy with the plan, they think that they're winners of it. Although I suspect that more teachers go to work by subway and bus than by car. Uh,
Right.
but I guess the leadership had a different view.
hmm And are you looking to work with any lawmakers to help with the legal challenge against the pause? I know, for example, New York City Comptroller Brad Lander has been pretty vocal about his opposition to the pause. Is there an opportunity to work with a comptroller or any other state lawmakers?
Yes, absolutely. We are actively working with Brad Lander's office right now, and
hmm
we're in touch with several other members of the state legislature and the city council and Congress.
And what does that working relationship look like?
Well, Brad Lander's office has helped us organize some of the meetings. They had a big press conference at the municipal building a couple of weeks ago. Um, it may be that some of these elected officials will join an amicus brief that will probably accompany the litigation and helping in other ways.
hmm And we know that there were millions of dollars used to help with the infrastructure to help with the congestion pricing plan. That, of course, won't be used because there is a pause. So, is that something that will be included in terms of the legal challenge?
Well, we'll certainly mention it that a lot of money has been put into this. It's not clear whether the fact that they spent that money would itself be a legal basis for challenging what was happening.
And I know you don't have a crystal ball or anything, but where do you see this all panning out in the years or the months ahead in terms of congestion pricing?
Well, there's so much, there's such good arguments for congestion pricing to proceed. It resulted from many years of study and analysis and advocacy. And I think one way or the other will have congestion pricing, although it didn't happen on June 30th as the state law required.
And what would that look like?
Well, I think it would be again congestion pricing as originally planned. There's some reports that there are negotiations about maybe lowering the toll, lowering the amount of revenue that has to be gathered. That would still leave a big hole in the MTA's capital budget, but we'll see how it washes out.
And do you think there's an opportunity to come up with a plan in which all parties are happy?
I I don't see a plan in which everybody's happy because congestion pricing intrinsically involves charging some people money, and the people who have to pay money are probably not going to like it. So I don't see a win-win-win situation. I think there will be some unhappy people, whatever happens.
Absolutely. Well, certainly a lot to look forward to, but we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good talking to you.
And we were speaking with Michael Gerrard, professor of law at Columbia University. And for more on the pause on congestion pricing in New York City and the possible legal challenges, you can visit our website. That's at nynow.org. And now turning to another topic. In New York State, about 7% of pet owners have pet insurance. That reality, mixed with rising costs of living, can mean financial hardship should a pet owner have to foot the bill of a medical emergency for their animal. With many New Yorkers feeling the pressure of finances, Assemblymember Pamela Hunter, who sits on the Assembly Insurance Committee, has been pushing a bill meant to provide state regulation on pet insurance in New York. Currently, the bill has been passed in both chambers and needs the governor's signature to become law. The Assembly member spoke with us about the bill's impact and the path forward. Thank you so much for joining us today, Assembly member.
Thank you.
And can you help us understand why putting regulations on pet insurance across the state has been such a legislative priority for you?
Well, as many people know, I sit on the insurance committee for the state assembly and have for several years since actually being elected in November 15th. in that special election. And since then, I've been a part of the National Council of Insurance Legislators, and I sit as the national vice president. So across the country for years, since I've been involved and since before, obviously this organization's been around for 50 years, that we look at models across the country of insurance legislation to try to bring things back to our own respective states that might work. And in collaboration with NCOIL and the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, that would be equivalent to our DFS here in New York State, that they had put together a model that I thought looked really good for New York relative to pet insurance and providing protections for people who have those kinds of policies.
And I was shocked to learn that about 7% of pet owners in New York actually have pet insurance. So, how do you think your bill would help entice those pet owners or even people considering getting a pet to get pet insurance?
I think, firstly, it makes people aware that there is actually pet insurance out there available outside of getting it at your veterinarian's our
Hmm.
office. I think many times for us who have furry friends in our lives, that many times when we go to the veterinarian, we see a sign for pet insurance, but that's not the pet insurance that you would normally get maybe from Nationwide or another insurance carrier. And so there are insurers who do provide pet insurance and wanting to make sure that there's protections in place for consumer and protections. The disclosures are there so people know what they're buying. Is it accident insurance? Is it illness insurance? Is it a wellness program? So wanting to make sure the disclosures are there for all folks and they know what they're buying specifically and what it does cover. Pre-existing conditions have always been an issue, even for people, and so we wanted to make sure we put something in there for pets as well, putting the onus on the insurer to clarify relative to the pre-existing conditions. Also, there's a training requirement in there that I think is important. Most insurance carriers obviously have training and they know their products and they know what they're selling, but we wanted to codify this to make sure across the board insurance carriers are providing training to their representatives about specifically what pet insurance does and the protections for consumers.
And from your purview, why has it taken the state so long to put these regulations on pet insurance in place?
I think it's a niche, a product. We've seen, sometimes other excess line or surplus line insurances that maybe are outside the traditional market that people may, want to get insurance for, whether you're Mariah Carey and protecting your legs, right? Remember, that in the past or something else. But this is not a one off. I mean, 7% of our population is not an insignificant amount of people. And so we want to make sure these consumers are protected and that there's policies in place to codify and to let folks know what they're buying.
And as you mentioned, New York wouldn't be the first state to implement regulations on pet insurance. It has been passed in several other states. So, how would this bill in New York be similar or different from that has been passed in those other states?
As I said, and sitting in this kind of national space that I've been in, it all depends on what you're able to pass in your individual legislature,
Right.
right? Things that we might be able to pass in New York may not be able to pass in other states. So we wanted to take all of the parts that one we knew that could get passed, but also the most protection available for consumers. And so where we may have a training codification requirement in our bill, other states may not have that as well.
And at the time that we're filming this, the bill has been passed in both chambers of the legislature and currently needs the governor's signature. So, what are your conversations like with the executive chamber about support for the bill?
At this point, we have not received any concern relative to this piece of legislation, either from the second floor from the governor's office or from the Department of Financial Services. So um, I like to think no news is good news, right? When it comes time to be
Mhm.
able to get this piece of legislation passed, but we won't know until it either gets sent from us or it gets called up from the governor's office for signing. But I think we make a good case in this bill. It's common sense piece of legislation. It, is just codifying things and statute for protections for consumers. And um, this is really expensive. If you have a pet and they become ill or get hurt, and you take them to the veterinarian, we're not usually talking about a $25 copay here. We're talking about hundreds or thousands of dollars that consumers are having to spend on accidents for their pets. And we just want to make sure
Mhm.
if there are insurance products available to insure your furry friend, that you are protected, know the disclosures, and know the kind of policy that you're buying.
And in the event that the bill doesn't get signed into law, are there any changes that you're considering to help get it over the finish line heading into the next legislative session?
Well, at this point, since we've not received anything from either the department, the superintendent herself, or even
Mhm.
the governor's office. We're expecting great things for this bill to be signed, but should there be a potential veto or chapter amendment, we definitely will work through, but want to make sure that the provisions in place for consumer protections are there. And, you don't want to gut a bill so much that it's not really protecting or helping anybody that, we're trying to protect. And so we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but I'm pretty hopeful that this just is an easy standalone bill that should easily be able to get across the finish line and be able to protect New Yorkers should they want pet insurance.
And at a time where so many New Yorkers are being bogged down by debt, a lot of which is associated with medical bills, how are you hoping putting regulations on pet insurance will help their ability to avoid debt?
Well, insurance is really financial literacy. It's making sound financial decisions. As chair of the banking committee, sitting in the insurance committee, we're always talking about sound financial security, literacy, wanting to make sure that people, put themselves in a place in case that there are things that happen, unexpected, hospital bills, and having insurance really is a way to protect yourself financially. And so having pet insurance, having personal health insurance, having car insurance. These are protections. And yes, in some ways, this may be another monthly bill, and normally pet insurance isn't super expensive, but paying $20, $40 per month for pet insurance is far less than getting an emergency, unexpected $2,000, $3,000 bill from the veterinarian. And so it's really kind of like in your toolkit of financial products that you need to, make sure you're saving some money and protecting yourself against any kind of liability. This is important to have.
And what are you hearing from constituents in your own district about how this will impact their lives, pockets, and their ability to take care of their pets?
It's been great. We have lots of furry friend lovers in the 128th Assembly District, but really across the state. And I think one of the biggest concerns that folks are having is a concern that some of these insurers are taking away policies and not wanting to write any more pet insurance. And this is just not about pet insurance. This is about insurance across the country, whether it's relative to property casualty insurance, writing homeowners policies, people getting car insurance. This is kind of a volatile market right now for insurance. So I think people are very concerned that if they have insurance, we've heard from a national carrier saying that they weren't going to provide this anymore. If they have this insurance, and all of a sudden a carrier may want to not provide this line, what happens, especially if their pet has a pre-existing condition? And that's another big thing that we've been hearing from constituents is if my dog has been sick and I have this policy and my carrier doesn't want to, provide that anymore, where do I go now that my dog, or cat may have a pre-existing condition? So these are real concerns. People are really, concerned about their pocketbook, trying to make sure that they're making great choices relative to their finances. And insurance, like I said, is a very important step. But they're concerned that what happens if they close up shop and their pet is sick? How does that get them covered in the future if they want a new policy?
And for New Yorkers who may not be pet owners, why is this something that they should hope that the governor signs into law?
I think just protection, financial protection for everyone. I think that we should be concerned about all residents of New York State and making sure that they're, protected. And just imagine if your house caught on fire and you didn't have homeowners insurance, we would be concerned about the people who, live in that house and what's going to happen with them and where they're going to live. Well, we are concerned about the, pets as well. It's not insignificant. This is not going to cost someone who doesn't have a pet any money. Obviously, it's someone's own personal policy and they're paying for that themselves. But insurance is very expensive across the board for everything. And we've been seeing, especially as I said, with the property casualty market, where there's been significant increases. We've seen supply chain problems. We've seen problems with mega storms happening across the country. And, these premium payers, you and I, are the ones who are paying for all of this. And so we just want to be super careful that we're not putting undue burden on someone else.
And apart from regulating pet insurance, what are some of the other ways that you're hoping to help pet owners in the years to come?
Well, we can start with this. Obviously, we do pass legislation that's broad across for the whole entire state and obviously allocate the state's budget. And so, wanting to make sure if there, needs to be any type of additional legislation relative to our pets, that we're taking care of that. And if there needed to be any resources that come from the state relative to the budget, we definitely can take a look into consideration about that. Our legislative session is over for this year, and so these will be conversations that would continue into the fall, preparing for next year. But at this point, I think we're on pretty good, solid footing, especially with this piece of legislation. And then we'll just have to see, when other issues and problems arise.
Certainly a lot to look forward to. We'll have to have you back on the show to discuss more. We thank you so much for taking the time to connect with us today, Assemblymember.
Thank you so very much.
And we were speaking with Assemblymember Pamela Hunter. And for more information and resources on pet insurance, you can visit our website. Again, that's at nynow.org. Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,